Hello everyone, Darren here from Republic of Play, and today we're going to be talking about the hottest upcoming grand strategy game from Paradox Interactive, Crusader Kings 3. So I've been asked a lot to cover CK3 because in the lead up to Imperator Rome, I was breaking down the dev diaries, and I do the same for Stellaris' big updates. But I haven't ever done a video on Crusader Kings, and that's because I have a deep dark secret that not many people know about, and one I'm deeply ashamed of, and that's that I kind of just don't like the game. I just don't really like it. There, I said it. And before you hit the dislike button, and for God's sakes, who could blame you with an intro like this, just hear me out. I haven't really played the game. I haven't really played CK2. Every time I've tried, I get massively turned off by the UI. It's really small. It's actually honestly strains my eyes playing that game. I find it hard to do things. The tutorial's out of date. The game has had so many iterations and updates and DLCs that when I've watched videos, they're now out of date. Things are just compounding on top of that like crazy. It's just not a user-friendly experience, and not only that, it's not particularly pretty to look at either. I don't even necessarily want to play it because it's not very inviting. So if it wasn't for the thousands of people who swear by the game, I don't even think I'd ever have even tried it. So I know that's a pretty shallow thing to say, and like I said, I am deeply ashamed, but I do know lots of people who love the game, and I also know lots of people who've just never been able to kind of get into it. It seems that if you can put up with the UI and stick with it, as I've heard many people say, you'll eventually learn to forget how it looks and get sucked into the roleplay, the characters, and the events. If you're watching this and thinking, well, I don't know, Darren, what you're talking about, the game looks fine to me. That's called Stockholm Syndrome, and you need to get help. So that's why I've avoided coverage of the game. It's because generally, I just don't know much about it, and I wouldn't want to pretend. But there might be some utility in that for people like me, so it'll be up to you to let me know. If this video does well, or the comments want to see more about Crusader Kings 3 on this channel, then I'll keep covering it from the perspective of someone who is going in fresh and not constantly comparing things back to the previous game. And from what I've seen, I'm genuinely really excited now, and it's largely down to the UI, which is a really weird thing to base my excitement on, but when your game is basically just a map and lots of information, then how you present that information is a massive component of the game. And from what I've seen, they're getting a lot right, and more importantly, they're making big strides in this area. After Stellaris had such rich UI and art, and to a lesser degree even Hearts of Iron 4, I was just really disappointed with Imperator Rome's UI. And if people watch my videos on Imperator, they'll know that I just don't shut up about that. So I think it's only right to give credit where it's due and call out the fact that I think they're doing a great job here so far. So what am I talking about specifically? Well, to start off kind of basic and just to get the more mundane stuff out of the way, the UI has been largely decluttered, removing much of the crafted stone and stained glass textures from the old game in favor of just a basic black backdrop or a subtle bluish-grey soft painted texture that fits most panels and tooltips. This bluish texture is used throughout the game, just in different shades to provide separators and define borders. Text is then typically displayed in white when it's against the black, or in yellow when it's against the blue. Again, just sets it out, kind of nicely standing out on its own against the backdrop. The font has then also been simplified, removing much of the serif and styled edges to it, giving it a simpler and more modern feel, and also increasing the size, so at least for me, no more eye strain. So it's kind of interesting from a design standpoint that they definitely pulled back on the medieval styled UI and font, but I think it's for the better. It certainly looks a lot clearer to me, and they've kept the style in the really important areas such as the stained glass in the big event headers, the styled font on the map itself, especially when you're fully zoomed out, and there's the occasional use of scrolls here and there, so you still kind of get that medieval, kind of more tactile feel to the world. Now, from a functionality perspective, many may have seen this already, but the tooltips can now be expanded. When a tooltip appears, you can lock it in place and then hover over other concepts and keywords in that tooltip to create another one. And you can do this infinitely. I've recently done a video on a game that used this nested tooltip system called Old World, and it's a complete game changer. I think it'll become the standard for all strategy games going forward, and I'm delighted to see that Crusader Kings is using it. While the concept of infinite tooltips might scare some people, it's actually a great way to declutter tooltips in general. The first layer can now just give you the most important information, while subsequent layers will delve deeper into mechanics. This way, advanced players aren't going to be hit with all the information that they already know about in every single tooltip, but instead they're just going to be shown what they need, while newer players, who are still kind of learning the game, can go deeper should they wish. It's also color-coded, with the more brown tooltips that appear being the game's concepts, which is just a nice distinction to let you know that you're no longer looking at information about values or breakdowns of stats, but instead you're now looking at concepts and mechanics. So overall, it means an easier learning experience and also a cleaner UI. I have noticed that the nested tooltips do tend to overlap. I think I did maybe prefer the old world variation of this, where whenever possible the new tooltips would always try to not obstruct anything. So perhaps maybe a little improvement could be seen there, but I don't know, maybe it's not an issue at all. One other thing on the subject of tooltips is that occasionally you'll still get those massive ones where it actually trails off screen and it might even obstruct information. And this is because you might be declaring independence or doing something that affects a lot of people. And in this case, instead of saying 50 times over that John loses opinion, Mark loses opinion, David loses opinion, and so on, a smarter tooltip that instead would just say John, Mark, and David lose X amount of opinion would be much better, especially when all the values are the same. So combining the information would be nice if they could just figure out where they need to do that kind of thing. So again, hopefully that can be improved. You might not think that's that big of a deal, but often these tooltips that go off screen can actually have a different effect at the very, very bottom, and you don't get to see it. At least in my experience in Imperator-Rome, that's what happens. So switching gears away from tooltips, another thing I wanted to give a shout out to is the lifestyle screen. In CK3 you choose a set lifestyle for your character and then choose to develop the character in kind of a set of skill trees, and I just love how it's laid out. The trees, while not that detailed, are actually given plenty of room to breathe and room for tooltips to be displayed detailing what everything does. This could have just been a tiny list of buttons next to your portrait or something for all anyone cared, but displaying it like this just adds gravitas to the choices that you're making and really isolates the decisions to this screen, so you focus on the impact that it's going to have. Having the full 3D character render there as well, just again really makes it feel a lot more personal. There's a few extra quality of life features that have made their way over from Paradox's other titles and also some other games, such as hovering over the flag of a vassal is then going to highlight that kind of area on the map regardless of what menu you're in, so you can just quickly see who you're dealing with. There's now also an Encyclopedia that you can browse through game concepts and search for keywords, much like in Civilization. So this is obviously a massive improvement, and hopefully it means that you don't have to go to the wiki or look up videos to really just learn about how to do something or a concept in the game. So that's some of the UI stylings, the tooltips, and some quality of life features, but there's also a really great amount of art on show in the UI as well. Again, coming off of Imperator-Rome, I was disappointed that clicking a city in India looked basically the same as clicking a city in Ireland, but now there's a much bigger set of backdrops for characters representing their culture and their surroundings much more, so it just really helps with the world building and flavor when you get a feel for the area visually as well as then in the events and interactions that you have. Now when it comes to the icons, they've gone for a really nice mix of detailed painted icons for your traits of characters, again just to give you that kind of at a glance representation of what makes up a character, but then also a really nice stylized silhouette icon for broader concepts. And this kind of fits in with that bluish grey texture that we were talking about before really nicely as well. Occasionally you'll actually see it then use red when it kind of catches your eye for something that's more important or more negative, such as schemes. Now as an example of what I'm going on about here, check out the Buildings UI for Crusader Kings 3 compared to the Buildings UI for Imperator-Rome. Now I don't mean to be dragging Imperator all the time, but I just feel like I need to show what it is versus what it could have been. And again, I'm just glad to see the effort has been made here. The building panel here has flavor text about what it is, shows what it does, the costs involved, and it just looks really clean. All of these things on their own might not seem that crazy, but it really does make a big difference in my view. And as someone who doesn't know a lot about the concepts in Crusader Kings, I'm watching quick videos and really getting a good feel and understanding already of where to look to see things and see what things do what. Now lastly, it's not really UI related, but again it's just a shout out to the art, that the characters are front and center of the game. I really like the characters in Imperator-Rome, and the character generator that they used in that game has now been improved to do full 3D animated renders with dynamic changes that affect appearance, such as aging, sickness, and clothing. This is then often used to generate a 2D still for events and tooltips, giving you quick recognition of characters as well. And this is just awesome to see Paradox investing again so heavily into their art, as I think it will help pull in those players that sit on the fence. I would never want these games to lose an ounce of depth that they have in terms of mechanics, but better UI and art is always a welcome change that everyone should embrace and commend them for. Seeing all the backdrops for people in your council, and so many other events that show doctors, surgeries, taverns, and all the castles and cities, it really brings the world to life. The more art, the better, in my view. My one fear with the 3D characters is what happened in Total War Rome 2, which is that they're much harder to remember than a 2D portrait. They're much less distinct. And this is largely due to the pose the characters often retain. If you're seeing them from different angles because they're 3D, or if they change clothes, it might be tricky to remember them. So hopefully they're still going to focus on somehow keeping up that familiarity and a few key ways to make sure you really remember and recognize who you deal with, whether it be their posture, their backdrop, or their clothing. And that is really it for my gush about Crusader Kings 3's UI. Of course, I haven't played the game, but from what I've watched, it looks like it's going to be very good. But again, like I said, I haven't played CK2, so really I'm just going to be going in fresh. For people who've watched my Imperator coverage and my Let's Plays, they'll know that I love world building, focusing on characters and roleplay, so this game seems to be right up my alley. If you want more videos about Crusader Kings from me, perhaps an introductory guide as we get closer to the game's release where we essentially learn the game together, then let me know. Or if you think I should just leave it to the veterans, then also, seriously, let me know. I want to know. I want to best serve you guys. For me, I like the look of the game. I'm cautiously optimistic about it. I'm still a little bit shook from Imperator's release, so I imagine I'll be getting this probably on the Xbox Game Pass to test it out, and then I'll purchase it outright if it's as good as we hope. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.